Bell Witch Cabin, Adams, Tennessee. We booked it as a historic stay for one quiet weekend and a few clean recordings. The first night was almost normal, until the knocks answered my questions in perfect rhythm, like someone was standing inches behind the wall. At 3:13 a.m., a voice whispered my full name, then repeated a secret I had never told anyone on this trip. When the recorder spiked, the cabin went silent, and the bedroom door latched itself from the outside. I didn't come to Adams looking for a legend. I came looking for clean audio. After Skinwalker and Hoia Baciu, I wanted something simpler, something classic that listeners could recognize instantly. A haunted cabin, a known name, an old American story. When an online listing described a restored cabin near the Bell Witch area as historic, quiet, perfect for a weekend reset, it sounded like the exact kind of place that would either give nothing at all or give one unmistakable moment. I told myself that either outcome would work. That was the first mistake. We arrived late afternoon, the sun already lowering into that warm Tennessee gold that makes everything look safer than it is. The road into Adams narrowed as we left the main highway, passing long fields and bare winter trees that clicked softly in the wind. There was no dramatic sign that said danger, no warning, no dramatic fog, just a farmhouse here, a mailbox there, and that particular stillness rural towns get when the day is ending and everyone is indoors. I remember thinking that the quiet felt staged, like a set dressed for a story. The cabin itself sat back from the road, partially shielded by trees, a squat structure with weathered wood and a porch that creaked under my boots. Restoration or not, it carried age in the way old places do. The boards didn't just look worn, they looked tired. Inside, it smelled of dry timber, dust that had been cleaned but not erased, and a faint mineral scent like cold stone.
No candles, no strange symbols, no haunted decor. Just a simple living room, 2 small bedrooms, a kitchen that looked updated, and a short hallway that seemed a little too narrow for comfort. I set my gear down with the same routine every time. Tripod, small camera, spare batteries, audio recorder, and a cheap analog clock I bring specifically because digital clocks love to glitch in weird locations. My friend came with me for safety more than belief. The kind of person who doesn't argue about the paranormal, but also doesn't feed it. That balance usually keeps a trip grounded. We agreed on basic rules. No provoking, no challenges, no statements like, "Prove you're here." We'd record quietly, ask neutral questions, and treat the place like it was still someone's home, even if no one lived in it now. Before dusk, we walked the perimeter. The air cooled fast, and the woods behind the cabin swallowed sound in a way I didn't like. A few birds moved high in the branches, but otherwise it felt as if the land was holding its breath. We came back inside and made a simple dinner, talking about editing, thumbnails, titles, the practical stuff that keeps fear from taking over. The cabin played along for hours. It stayed calm. It stayed ordinary. It let me relax. Then, just after we turned off the kitchen light, the first knock hit the wall. One clean, deliberate tap. Not a settling creak, not a random pop from old wood, but a single knock with space around it, like punctuation. We froze, listening. A second knock followed, same volume, same spot. My friend tried to laugh it off, and I forced myself to breathe slowly, telling my body it was just temperature shift. But when I stepped closer to the hallway, the air felt different there. Cooler, tighter, like the space was crowded even when it was empty. I didn't ask for proof. I didn't challenge it. I simply said, quietly, into the recorder, "If someone is here, can you do that again?" One knock answered immediately. Not louder, not softer. Exactly the same, as if it had been waiting for a cue. And that was the moment the cabin stopped feeling like a rental and started feeling like a conversation I hadn't agreed to. We left the recorder running on the kitchen counter and tried to move on like nothing had happened, like the knocks were just the cabin settling into the cold. That's the rational script people follow when they don't want to give fear a foothold. We brushed our teeth, checked the locks out of habit, and split to our rooms with the kind of casual "good night" that sounds normal only because you force it to. The cabin stayed quiet long enough for my shoulders to drop, and that was almost worse, because it felt like patience, not peace. I lay on top of the blanket with my phone face down and the cheap analog clock beside it, its second hand sweeping steadily. 2:41 a.m. Then 2:42. The sound started as something I couldn't place, a thin thread of audio that didn't belong to the house or the night outside. It wasn't a full word yet. It was like someone speaking through a wall that wasn't thick enough, a whisper dragged across wood. I sat up slowly and held my breath. The whisper sharpened into syllables, and suddenly my body reacted before my mind could interpret it, that instinctive chill that happens when a sound is too close to be possible. It came again, clearer, from the hallway. My name. Not a nickname, not the short version, my full name, pronounced perfectly, with the calm confidence of someone reading it off a document. I didn't answer. I didn't even blink for a second. I just listened, because the scariest part wasn't hearing a voice. It was hearing a voice that sounded like it expected compliance. My friend called out from the other room, voice tight, asking if I'd said something. I told him no, keeping my tone flat on purpose. And he went quiet in a way that told me he'd heard it too. We met in the narrow hallway, both pretending we weren't afraid, both failing. The air there felt colder and heavier, and the darkness at the far end of the corridor looked thick, like it had depth. I remember thinking the hallway was the throat of the cabin, and we were standing inside it, waiting for it to swallow. The analog clock in my hand ticked normally, but my phone had no signal, and the battery had dropped far more than it should have in an hour. We didn't argue about it. We just accepted it as another thing that didn't fit. Back in the kitchen, the recorder's tiny light blinked steadily. I leaned in and whispered, as calmly as I could, "Can you knock once if you hear me?" A single knock answered. I tried again, changing the question, keeping it harmless. "2 knocks if you want us to leave." 2 knocks came back. Not delayed, not random. Clean, spaced, intentional. My friend swallowed hard and stared at the wall like he expected it to crack open. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt selected. The worst part came when the whisper returned, lower now, drifting from the hallway toward the kitchen. It didn't repeat my name. It said something else. Something personal, something that belonged in my head and nowhere outside it. A detail from my life I hadn't spoken aloud during the entire trip. Not in the car, not while setting up gear, not even as a joke. It wasn't dramatic or cinematic. It was mundane, which made it terrifying. It was the kind of private fact that proves you're not dealing with echoes. My friend stepped back toward the living room, and the bedroom door behind him clicked shut. Not slammed, not pushed. It simply closed with a neat mechanical finality, and when he grabbed the knob, it didn't turn. The latch held like someone had locked it from the outside. He tried again, harder, then stopped, breathing fast, because the sound of struggle in that cabin felt like an invitation. I walked over slowly, placed my palm flat against the door, and felt cold through the wood, as if winter was pressed right against the other side. We didn't yell. We didn't challenge. We stood there, listening, while the recorder captured everything. The knocks, the whisper, the pause that followed. Then, as if to remind us who controlled the pace, a final knock landed directly behind us in the kitchen wall, so close it felt like a fingertip touching bone. We didn't sleep after that. We sat at the kitchen table with the overhead light on, pretending the circle of brightness made us safer, and the recorder between us like a third person whose job was to keep the story honest. Every few minutes, one of us would glance down the hallway, expecting to see a shape in the dark. And every time the darkness stayed empty, it somehow felt more deliberate, like whatever was there didn't need to show itself to be present. Around 3:40 a.m., the cabin changed its tone, the way a room changes when an argument is about to start. The air turned noticeably colder, not a gradual nighttime drop, but a clean shift, as if someone opened an invisible door to winter. The old boards stopped creaking entirely, and for a brief stretch, the place was so quiet I could hear my own pulse and the shallow breathing of my friend across the table. Then we heard footsteps. Not outside, not on the porch. Inside the cabin, in the hallway. Slow and measured. They didn't rush, didn't sneak, didn't stumble. Each step landed with the flat certainty of someone walking normally. Except there was no second sound, no fabric, no cough, no sigh. Just the footfalls, paced like a countdown. My friend lifted his phone, using the camera as a makeshift night vision trick, and pointed it toward the dark corridor. The screen showed nothing but grain and shadows. The footsteps continued anyway, coming closer, and then, without warning, the kitchen chair opposite me scraped backward by an inch. It wasn't thrown. It didn't jerk like something hit it. It slid, slow and controlled, just enough to make the legs squeal softly across the floor. That's what turned my stomach. A violent moment can be dismissed as an accident. A careful inch feels like intention. I spoke quietly into the recorder, because speaking felt like the only tool I had left. "We're here respectfully," I said, choosing every word, keeping it neutral. "We're not here to offend anyone." I didn't ask it to prove anything. I didn't dare. The response wasn't a voice this time. It was the sound of the kitchen cabinet latch clicking open, followed by the slow creak of the door swinging outward, as if someone invisible had a hand on the handle and was showing me what control looked like. A single metal spoon slipped off the shelf and fell to the floor. Not a dramatic crash, just a clean drop, then a soft roll that stopped right at the toe of my boot. I didn't bend to pick it up. I stared at it like it was a message written in a language I didn't understand. My friend whispered that we should leave. I nodded, but neither of us moved yet, because leaving in the middle of the night meant stepping into the trees behind the cabin, and the hallway already felt like the cabin's mouth. Then the knocking returned, faster now. Not conversational taps, but a short pattern, like someone practicing a signal. 3 quick knocks, a pause, then 2 slower knocks. It repeated exactly, same spacing, same location in the wall, and the repetition made it feel organized, as if there was a system we were failing to learn. I caught myself trying to decode it, and that scared me, because it meant my brain was starting to cooperate with whatever was happening. The analog clock on the table kept ticking, but my friend's phone abruptly went black, then rebooted with the screen dimmed almost to nothing. When it came back on, the time read 3:13 a.m. again. Not close to 3:13, exactly 3:13, like the night had folded and snapped back to the same point. He showed it to me with wide eyes, and I felt a cold certainty settle in. This wasn't about fear anymore. It was about attention. As if to underline that thought, the recorder, sitting untouched between us, began to play back audio on its own. Not a random glitch, not an accidental button press. It played the earlier whisper, my full name, clear and close, the way it sounded when it first happened, as if the cabin was replaying the moment to remind us that it could. My friend stood up so fast his chair tipped. In the hallway, the footsteps resumed, now heading toward us again, steady and unhurried. We grabbed our keys, our coats, the recorder and one camera, only the essentials, and moved toward the front door. The knob turned easily, almost politely. But just before we stepped out, a whisper slid through the kitchen, gentle as breath. "Stay." It wasn't screened. It didn't need to be. We made it onto the porch, and the cold air hit my face like a reset button, sharp and honest compared to the cabin's tight, stale pressure. For a few seconds, I actually believed stepping outside would break whatever pattern had formed, the way walking out of a room ends an argument. But the silence out there wasn't relief. It was surveillance. The trees stood still, the road was empty, and even the insects felt muted, as if the entire property was waiting for us to decide which direction to go. We didn't run. Running turns fear into a performance, and something about that place had already proven it understood the value of attention. We walked off the porch and stopped near the car, just far enough that the cabin windows looked like dark eyes behind us. My friend kept his keys in his fist like a weapon, not because keys can protect you, but because holding something solid helps your brain pretend there's a plan. I checked the recorder immediately, needing to know whether it was still capturing clean audio or whether it had become another part of the cabin. The red light was on, the levels looked normal, and for a moment I felt stupid for being afraid. Then the cabin door behind us clicked, soft, neat, deliberate, and the porch light blinked once, twice, and steadied. A second later, the whisper returned, not from inside the house this time, but from the yard, as if the air itself had learned to speak. It didn't shout, it didn't threaten. It used the quiet confidence of someone reading a file. My full name again, followed by my mother's first name, then the city I grew up in. The words landed in the night with a calm that made them feel official, and my stomach dropped, because it wasn't just that the voice knew, it was that it enjoyed knowing. My friend turned his head slowly, scanning the edge of the property, and I watched his expression change from disbelief to that stunned, involuntary recognition people get when they hear something that belongs to them. He didn't say what he heard, not at first. He just swallowed, staring at the dark line of trees as if he'd seen movement. When he finally spoke, his voice sounded smaller than it should have in the open air. "It said my sister's name," he whispered. "And her nickname. No one here knows that." The cabin windows stayed dark, but I felt watched in a way that didn't require eyes. The rational part of my mind reached for explanations: online data, public records, coincidence, stress, suggestions. But those explanations fell apart under the weight of the details. The kind of details that aren't searchable unless you already know where to look. The kind of details that aren't dramatic enough to be guessed. The voice wasn't trying to impress us with spooky facts. It was trying to prove access. We got into the car fast, doors shutting with that relieving thud of metal and glass between us and the night. My friend started the engine, and the headlights spilled across the gravel, painting the porch and the front door in harsh white. For a few seconds, everything looked normal again. Just a cabin, a porch, a rural yard. I told myself that if we left right now and didn't look back, the story would end cleanly. Then the car radio turned on by itself, volume low, tuned to nothing but static. Under the static, a voice bled through, thin, warped, almost like an old broadcast struggling to stay alive. It repeated my name once, then my friend's. Then it said clearly, "Don't leave." As if the signal had been waiting in the circuitry for the right moment. My friend slammed the radio knob off, but the static didn't stop. It kept hissing quietly, like the car had become another room in the cabin. I reached for the recorder again, and that's when I noticed something that made my skin go numb. The file list had changed. A new clip existed, time-stamped earlier than our arrival, labeled with a time that didn't match any of our recordings. We hadn't created it. We hadn't even been on the property. My thumb hovered over play for a long second, and I realized the cabin had learned the most effective way to control us. Not by scaring us, but by dangling proof. I hit play, and in the speaker, beneath a layer of steady hiss, a whisper said my name, the way it had said it inside, close, intimate, certain, followed by a sentence that described what I was wearing right now, in the car, in the dark, in a place where we were supposed to finally be alone. The new audio file kept playing, and the longer I listened, the more it felt like the cabin wasn't recording anything at all. It felt like it was leaving notes inside my own equipment, using my tools as if they were part of the building. The voice on the file didn't sound angry or theatrical. It sounded calm, almost patient, like it knew we would listen no matter what it said. That calmness was what finally pushed me past curiosity and into something colder and more useful. The instinct to leave with as little interaction as possible. My friend's hands shook on the steering wheel, but he didn't drive yet. We both sat there with the engine idling, headlights fixed on the cabin porch, frozen between two bad choices. If we stayed, we risked giving the cabin more time to tighten whatever pattern it was building. If we left too fast, we risked turning the exit into a chase. In the end, we chose the third option. We waited for dawn like it was a rule of the land, the way sailors wait for tide changes. The sky was still black, but the darkness had started to thin around the edges. Inside the car, the radio continued to hiss even after being switched off, a thin static that wouldn't fully die. Every few minutes, a faint fragment of speech surfaced and then sank back under, like someone speaking from the bottom of a swimming pool. We didn't respond. We didn't argue with it. We didn't even say each other's names out loud, because after everything we'd heard, names felt like hooks. I kept my eyes on the cabin door, and I made myself count my breaths, not as a calming technique, but as a discipline, a way to keep my mind from reaching for more proof. At 5:22 a.m., the horizon finally bruised purple. That was the first moment the property felt less absolute. The porch light flickered once and stayed off. The air warmed slightly, enough that I could tell the difference between cold and wrong. The static on the radio thinned, still present but less insistent, like a signal losing strength. My friend glanced at me, and in that look we made a silent agreement. We were done negotiating. We moved carefully, not slamming doors, not shouting, not making sudden motions. We stepped out of the car and went back into the cabin for less than 2 minutes, just long enough to grab the rest of our bags. The inside smelled different in the early light. Less like pressure, more like stale wood. The hallway still looked too narrow, but it didn't feel crowded in the same way. I kept my recorder in my hand the entire time, because leaving it behind felt like leaving a piece of myself. As we crossed the living room, the kitchen cabinet door that had opened on its own during the night was closed again, perfectly aligned, as if it had never moved. That neatness made my skin crawl. It wasn't calm. It was control without effort. My friend grabbed the last bag, and we walked out without looking into the back rooms again. The front door shut behind us with a soft click, and for a second, I thought that would be the end of it. But when we reached the car, the recorder's screen flashed just once, like a pulse. A brand new file appeared at the top of the list, created in real time, with a duration that grew by the second, even though I wasn't pressing record. I stared at it, throat tight, and I understood the final trap. The cabin would keep offering evidence forever if I kept accepting it. Proof was the leash. I did the hardest thing I've ever done on a paranormal trip. I stopped the file. I powered the recorder off completely, and I didn't turn it back on until we were miles away, past the last trees, past the last curve of road where the cabin could still be imagined behind us. We drove out of Adams in silence, the sun rising fully now, normal daylight filling the car like forgiveness. The radio finally went quiet, truly quiet, and the static vanished as if it had never existed. I didn't feel victorious. I felt lucky. Because whatever lived in that cabin didn't need to chase us to win. It only needed us to keep listening. Later, back in a motel room with bright curtains and ordinary noise outside, we checked the equipment again.
The files were still there. Knocks, whispers, the strange pre-arrival clip, the radio hiss. Enough proof to build a story that sounded impossible and still felt clean enough for anyone to follow. But there was one thing missing, and that absence felt like a final message. The last file, the one that had begun recording itself, was gone completely. Not deleted by a hand, not corrupted like a bad memory card. Gone, as if it had never been offered. That's the part people always ask about later. Why stop recording? Why not chase the best evidence? The answer is simple. In that cabin, attention was currency, and the price of one more minute of proof felt like it might be something I couldn't afford to pay.